Entitled passenger humiliates. Quiet man on flight, pilot's announcement, leaves her speechless. The departure lounge at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport buzzed with the usual chaos of early Monday morning travel. Businessman clutched coffee cups like lifelines, families corralled restless children, and the gate agents' voices crackled through speakers announcing boarding groups with mechanical efficiency. At Gate C28, passengers waited for Flight 134 to Seattle, a route that cut diagonally across the country, carrying tech workers, tourists, and business travelers toward the Pacific Northwest. Among them sat Daniel Reeves, 47 years old, unremarkable in every visible way. His canvas messenger bag rested at his feet, worn but functional. His jacket was North Face, practical rather than fashionable, purchased 5 years ago, and still going strong. His jeans were clean, Levi's, his sneakers were New Balance, and his simple digital watch told time without making a statement. Everything about Daniel's appearance suggested a man of modest means, perhaps a middle manager or a teacher, someone who worked for a living but would never be mistaken for wealthy. The truth was considerably different, but Daniel had learned decades ago that anonymity had its advantages. As the founder and principal architect of Helix Systems, a cybersecurity firm that protected 70% of Fortune 500 companies from digital threats, Daniel was worth approximately $800 million. But wealth he had discovered attracted the wrong kind of attention. So he dressed like everyone else, flew commercial instead of private, and moved through the world without fanfare. He was absorbed in a thick paperback novel, a science fiction epic he had been working through for weeks when the announcement came. We will now begin boarding Flight 134 to Seattle. First class and our platinum members, welcome aboard. Daniel gathered his bag and joined the small queue at the gate. His platinum status had nothing to do with being wealthy and everything to do with flying this route twice a month for the past 3 years. Helix Systems had a major operations center in Seattle, and Daniel made it a point to visit regularly, believing that remote management was no substitute for being physically present with his team. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise behind him. "Excuse me, I think there's been a mistake." Daniel turned to see a woman in her early 40s, immaculately dressed in what was clearly an expensive designer suit. Her auburn hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup was flawless, and her leather briefcase probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her name, he would later learn, was Patricia Hammond, and she was a senior marketing executive at a pharmaceutical company, returning from a conference in Dallas. "Ma'am," the gate agent asked politely. Patricia pointed at Daniel. "He's in the first class line. I think he must be confused about which group was called." The gate agent glanced at her screen, then at Daniel's boarding pass. "Mr. Reeves is in first class, ma'am. Seat 2B? Patricia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "He's in first class?" "Yes, ma'am. Is there a problem?" Patricia's eyes traveled from Daniel's sneakers up to his messenger bag, her expression making it clear what she thought of his appearance. "No problem. Just surprising." Daniel felt the familiar prickle of judgment, but said nothing. He had dealt with people like Patricia Hammond his entire adult life. People who measured worth by visible markers of success, who couldn't conceive that someone dressed casually might have more money in their checking account than most people would earn in a lifetime. He simply nodded to the gate agent and proceeded down the jetway. The first-class cabin was configured in a standard 2-2 layout leather seats with generous legroom and the subtle scent of expensive air freshener. Daniel located 2B on the right side of the aircraft and settled in, stowing his bag under the seat in front of him. He pulled out his book again, hoping for a quiet flight where he could finish the last 100 pages. Patricia Hammond appeared moments later, checking her boarding pass against the seat numbers. Her face registered dismay when she realized she was in 2A, directly next to Daniel. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered loud enough for him to hear. Daniel looked up briefly, made eye contact, then returned to his book without comment. Experience had taught him that engaging with people determined to be offended by his existence only made things worse. Patricia shoved her briefcase into the overhead compartment with more force than necessary and dropped into her seat with an exaggerated sigh. She immediately pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, her thumbs stabbing at the screen with barely contained irritation. The flight attendant, a cheerful woman in her 30s, whose name tag read Angela, appeared with a tray of pre-departure beverages. "Good morning. Can I offer you water, orange juice, or champagne?" "Champagne," Patricia said, without looking up from her phone. "Water, please," Daniel said with a smile. "Thank you." Angela poured their drinks and moved on to the next row. Patricia took a large gulp of champagne, then glanced sideways at Daniel. "Let me guess," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Upgraded with miles, Daniel considered ignoring her, but decided a simple truth might end the conversation quickly. "Actually, I'm a platinum member. I fly this route regularly." "Platinum?" Patricia repeated, skepticism clear in her voice. "How impressive. What do you do, if you don't mind my asking?" "I work in technology," Daniel said, keeping his answer vague. "IT support," Patricia guessed. "Help desk. Something like that," Daniel replied, returning his attention to his book. Patricia laughed a sharp sound without genuine humor. "Well, at least you're honest. Most people in your position would try to inflate their importance." "I work in technology," she mimicked, as if tech support is something glamorous. Daniel said nothing. Around them, other passengers were boarding, stowing luggage, and settling into their seats. The cabin filled with the usual sounds of travelers preparing for a 3.5-hour flight. "I'm in pharmaceutical marketing," Patricia announced, apparently determined to establish the hierarchy between them. Executive level. "I was in Dallas for a major industry conference where I gave the keynote address to 1,500 people. I manage a team of 42 people across 6 offices. My budget is $17 million annually." "That sounds like important work," Daniel said neutrally. "It is," Patricia confirmed. "Very high pressure, very high stakes. Not everyone can handle that level of responsibility. It requires a certain caliber of person, a certain pedigree." The word pedigree hung in the air like a bad smell. Daniel had heard this kind of talk before, usually from people whose sense of self-worth was entirely bound up in their job title and salary. People who needed to establish dominance in every interaction, who couldn't simply exist without ranking themselves against everyone around them. "I'm sure it's very demanding," Daniel said, hoping his bland agreement would end the conversation. Instead, Patricia took it as encouragement. "You know, when I book first class, I have certain expectations about the experience. Part of that experience is being surrounded by other professionals, other people who've achieved a certain level of success. It's networking, but it's also just an atmosphere of excellence. Daniel finally understood. She wasn't just being casually dismissive. She was actively trying to make him feel that he didn't belong, that his presence in first class somehow diminished her experience. "I'm sorry my appearance doesn't meet your standards," Daniel said, his voice even, but with an edge to it now. "But I paid for my seat just like everyone else." "Oh, I'm not saying you don't have the right to be here." Patricia backtracked slightly, though her tone suggested that was exactly what she was saying. "I'm just surprised that someone in your line of work would spend the money on first class. Seems like economy would be more appropriate to your budget." "My budget is fine," Daniel said. "Sure," Patricia said, in a tone that clearly meant she didn't believe him. "I'm just saying, if you're doing help desk support, you're probably making what, $40,000 a year, maybe 50, if you're senior. Spending $3,000 on a first-class ticket is probably not the wisest financial decision." The presumption was breathtaking. Daniel could have told her that his annual income was in the high seven figures, that he held patents worth millions, that the cybersecurity protocols protecting her company's data were almost certainly developed by his firm. But he didn't. Partly because he preferred privacy, partly because he was curious to see how far she would take this. "I make enough," he said simply. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, and the flight attendants began the safety demonstration. Patricia watched with the bored expression of someone who had seen this hundreds of times before. Daniel, despite having flown thousands of miles, paid attention. Old habits from his Air Force days, when attention to safety protocols had been drilled into him relentlessly. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Patricia pulled out an iPad encased in leather that probably cost more than Daniel's entire outfit. She made a show of opening a presentation document, her screen angled so Daniel could see graphs and corporate logos. "I'm working on a pitch for our board of directors," she announced. $50 million campaign. Highest stakes project of my career. Of course, this level of strategic thinking is probably beyond your experience." Daniel bit back a response. In the past year, Helix Systems had closed deals worth over $200 million. He had personally presented to the boards of companies whose market caps dwarfed Patricia's pharmaceutical employer. But again, he said nothing. The aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the Texas morning. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and Angela reappeared with warm towels and the first-class breakfast menu. "We have a vegetable frittata with Gruyere cheese or Norwegian salmon with dill cream," Angela explained. "Which would you prefer?" "The salmon, please," Daniel said. "It sounds excellent." "Frittata," Patricia said without looking up from her iPad. As Angela moved away, Patricia stage whispered to the woman across the aisle, another business traveler who had been minding her own business. "Can you believe they let just anyone into first class these days? I mean, look at him. Sneakers and a messenger bag. When I started flying first class, it meant something." The woman across the aisle looked uncomfortable and made a non-committal sound, clearly not wanting to be drawn into Patricia's campaign of casual cruelty. Undeterred, Patricia continued, "I bet he saved up for months for this ticket. Probably his one big splurge for the year. Meanwhile, my company pays for all my first-class travel. That's the difference between being important and being whatever he is." Daniel felt anger building, but kept his face neutral. He had dealt with bullies his entire life. Growing up poor in rural Montana, being the smart kid who got a scholarship to MIT navigating the class divisions of the tech world, where pedigree and connections often mattered more than talent. He had learned to let ignorance roll off him. But there was something particularly grating about Patricia's need to not just judge him privately, but to publicly humiliate him, to ensure everyone around them knew she considered him beneath her. The breakfast service arrived, and both meals looked and smelled delicious. Daniel ate slowly, savoring the perfectly cooked salmon, while Patricia picked at her frittata and continued working on her iPad, occasionally sighing dramatically as if to emphasize how busy and important she was. About an hour into the flight, Patricia's phone rang. Despite the quiet atmosphere of the first-class cabin and the expectation that passengers would keep conversations brief and quiet, she answered immediately and at full volume. Patricia Hammond. Oh, hi, Richard. Yes, I'm on the plane. About 2 more hours to Seattle. She paused, listening. The conference was fantastic. My keynote was very well received. Multiple people told me it was the best presentation of the event. Daniel tried to focus on his book, but Patricia's voice made it impossible. I know. The Seattle team needs a lot of hand-holding. That's what happens when you hire people who aren't quite top tier. Sometimes you get what you pay for. She laughed at something the person on the other end said. Exactly. That's why leadership is so important. Some people are just naturally suited to lead, and others are meant to follow orders. It's not classist to acknowledge that it's just reality. Daniel gritted his teeth. The irony of Patricia's words, spoken loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear, was apparently lost on her. She was demonstrating precisely the kind of classism she claimed didn't exist. Listen, I need to go over the Q3 projections with you when I land, Patricia continued. I think we need to be more aggressive with our market positioning. We're playing it too safe, and safe is boring. Bold is what wins. Another pause. Well, not everyone has the stomach for bold moves. That's why people like us end up running things while others, she glanced meaningfully at Daniel, end up in support roles. The call finally ended, and Patricia tucked her phone away with a satisfied smile, clearly pleased with herself for conducting important business while lesser mortals like Daniel simply read their books. Angela appeared again, this time with a tray of cookies and coffee. Can I offer you anything? Coffee black, Patricia said. And can I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. What's your policy on first-class passengers? Are there any actual requirements? Or can anyone just book a seat if they have enough money? Angela's professional smile didn't waver, but Daniel saw the flash of discomfort in her eyes. First class is available to any passenger who purchases a ticket, ma'am. We don't have additional requirements. That seems like a missed opportunity, Patricia said. Maintaining a certain atmosphere, a certain clientele that has value. If first class becomes just like economy, but with bigger seats, what's the point? We believe all our passengers deserve respect and excellent service, Angela said diplomatically. Can I get you anything else? No, that's all. As Angela moved away, Daniel saw her catch his eye and give him a look of sympathetic exasperation. He smiled slightly in acknowledgement. He wasn't the first passenger to be subjected to someone like Patricia, and he wouldn't be the last. The flight continued, and Patricia's commentary became more brazen. She made calls to colleagues during which she loudly discussed her opinions on everything from corporate strategy to employee performance reviews. She sent emails with the keyboard clicks turned up to maximum volume. She watched a video on her iPad without headphones until Angela gently reminded her that sound needed to be kept private. Through it all, Daniel said nothing. He read his book, occasionally looked out the window at the landscape passing below, and tried to practice the mindfulness techniques his therapist had recommended for dealing with stressful situations. But inside, he was composing a very different response. As the founder of Helix Systems, Daniel had access to resources and information that would make Patricia's head spin. His company's client list included virtually every major corporation in America, including, he was fairly certain, Patricia's pharmaceutical employer, her company's digital infrastructure, their data security, their protection against cyber attacks, all of it ran on systems developed by Helix. More than that, Daniel was personal friends with several C-suite executives across multiple industries. His annual conference in San Francisco attracted CEOs, CTOs, and board members from the world's most powerful companies. He had been featured in Wired, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. His TED Talk on the future of cybersecurity had over 5 million views. But Patricia, judging entirely by his clothing and her own prejudices, had decided he was nobody, beneath her, unworthy of basic courtesy. As they began the descent into Seattle, flying over the Cascade Mountains with their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the afternoon sun, Captain Jennifer Walsh's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain speaking. We're beginning our initial descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. We should be on the ground in about 20 minutes. Weather is typical Pacific Northwest overcast with light rain, temperature about 52 degrees. Patricia was gathering her things, checking her makeup in a compact mirror, preparing for landing. She had apparently decided that having completed her campaign of humiliation, she could now ignore Daniel entirely. Then Captain Walsh's voice returned, but this time with a different tone. Less formal, more personal. "Before we land, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge a very special passenger we have on board today. Those of you in the tech industry will certainly recognize the name Daniel Reeves." Patricia froze, her compact mirror suspended in midair. "Mr. Reeves is the founder and CEO of Helix Systems, one of the most important cybersecurity companies in the world," Captain Walsh continued. "His company's work protects critical infrastructure, financial systems, and personal data for millions of people. He's a pioneer in digital security and a leader in ethical technology development." The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger was listening now. I also want to mention that Mr. Reeves is a veteran of the United States Air Force, where he served as a cybersecurity specialist before founding his company. His contributions to both military and civilian digital security have been extraordinary. Patricia had turned to stare at Daniel, her face cycling through shades of white and red. Additionally, Captain Walsh went on, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice, "Mr. Reeves is one of the most humble people in the tech industry. Despite his tremendous success and wealth, he's known for treating everyone with respect, for mentoring young engineers, and for believing that a person's worth has nothing to do with their appearance or job title." The captain paused for effect. "So Mr. Reeves, on behalf of everyone at this airline and to everyone who benefits from your work, which is basically everyone with a smartphone or a computer, thank you. Thank you for your service, for your innovation, and for showing us that true success doesn't need designer labels or expensive accessories. It just needs brilliance, dedication, and character. Welcome to Seattle. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers turned in their seats to look back at Daniel, many pulling out their phones to Google him. The woman across the aisle who Patricia had tried to recruit into her mockery was grinning widely. Even the passengers in economy who could hear the announcement through the curtain were clapping. Daniel felt his face flush. He hated being the center of attention, which was part of why he dressed so modestly. But he also felt a surge of gratitude toward Captain Walsh, who had clearly overheard or been briefed about the situation in the cabin. Patricia looked like she wanted the floor of the aircraft to open up and swallow her. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the mortification written across her features. Her hands were shaking slightly as she tried to close her compact mirror and succeeded only in dropping it. "You," she whispered, turning to Daniel. "You're Daniel Reeves." "I am," Daniel confirmed quietly. "The Daniel Reeves, founder of Helix Systems." "Yes." "But you were dressed like—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Like someone comfortable," Daniel suggested. "Like someone who doesn't need to prove anything to strangers. Like someone who learned a long time ago that real wealth is measured in things that don't show." Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The full weight of her comments over the past 3 hours was crashing down on her. Every assumption, every dismissive remark, every attempt to make him feel small was now revealed for the ugly prejudice it was. "Oh my God," she breathed. "I had no idea. If I had known who you were, then you would have treated me differently," Daniel finished. "Yes, I understand. That's the problem, Ms. Hammond. You judge people's worth by their appearance, by visible markers of status. You never considered that the quiet person next to you might be more successful, more important, more valuable than you could imagine." Other passengers were openly watching now, some recording on their phones. Patricia glanced around and seemed to realize that her humiliation was about to become very public. "I made a mistake," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "But surely you can understand you were dressed so casually and in first class. One expects a certain what?" Daniel interrupted, his voice still calm but now edged with steel. "A certain conformity to your expectations. A certain performance of wealth. Ms. Hammond, I'm worth approximately $800 million. I could buy your pharmaceutical company outright if I wanted to. I dress this way because I'm comfortable, because I don't need to impress anyone, and because I learned decades ago that people who judge others by their clothes aren't worth impressing." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the aircraft engines seemed muted. "But more importantly," Daniel continued, "I dress this way as a test that you failed spectacularly, because how someone treats people they perceive as beneath them reveals their true character. And Ms. Hammond, your character is ugly." Patricia's eyes were glistening with tears. Whether of shame or anger or both, Daniel couldn't tell. "You spent 3 hours making sure everyone around us knew you considered me inferior," Daniel said. "You mocked my clothes, my job, my financial status. You went out of your way to be cruel. And why? Because it made you feel superior. Because putting someone else down was easier than dealing with your own insecurities." "Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry," Patricia managed. "I was wrong. Completely wrong. Can we—" "We can't do anything," Daniel said firmly. "This conversation is over, but I want you to take something away from today, Ms. Hammond. The next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, remember this moment. Remember the person you dismissed as beneath you, because that person might be the CEO who could advance your career, or the investor who could fund your project, or just a human being who deserves basic respect regardless of who they are. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the wet runway, the wheels chirping as they made contact. As they taxied to the gate, Patricia sat frozen, staring straight ahead, apparently unable to process what had just happened. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, Daniel stood and retrieved his messenger bag. Angela appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Reeves, Captain Walsh would like to meet you if you have a moment." "Of course," Daniel said warmly. As he moved toward the cockpit, other passengers wanted to shake his hand, take selfies, or just thank him. He obliged everyone graciously, though he kept glancing at his watch. He had a meeting at the Seattle office in 90 minutes and needed to get moving. Patricia remained in her seat, apparently paralyzed, as passengers filed past. Several shot her looks of contempt or disapproval. The video of Daniel's response was already being uploaded to social media, and her name and company were about to become infamous for all the wrong reasons. Captain Walsh greeted Daniel enthusiastically. "Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry about that situation. My first officer is actually one of your employees. He works part-time doing security audits for Helix. He recognized you and told me what was happening in the cabin. We've had passengers recording and sending reports to our crew." "I appreciate you saying something," Daniel said, "though I was hoping to stay under the radar." "I know," Captain Walsh said, with an apologetic smile, "but sometimes people need to be reminded that they can't judge books by their covers. And honestly, that woman needed to be put in her place." They chatted for a few minutes about cybersecurity challenges in aviation, and Daniel promised to have his team reach out about some upcoming updates to flight control systems protection. When Daniel finally exited the aircraft, Patricia was nowhere to be seen. She had apparently fled as quickly as possible, eager to escape the scene of her humiliation. Daniel's driver was waiting at the curb, not a limousine, but a simple Tesla Model 3. His security detail consisted of one person, a former Secret Service agent named Martinez, who dressed as casually as Daniel did. "How was the flight?" Martinez asked, as they pulled away from the terminal. "Educational," Daniel replied. "Reminded me why I usually fly in the middle of the night when the planes are empty." "Saw the videos," Martinez said, glancing at his phone. "You're trending on Twitter. Billionaire CEO humiliated on flight is the top story." "Great," Daniel said dryly. "That's exactly the kind of publicity I was trying to avoid. For what it's worth, boss, the comments are 99% supportive of you. People are saying it's refreshing to see a CEO who doesn't act like an entitled jerk." Daniel sighed. "I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just wanted to read my book." "Welcome to the internet," Martinez said with a grin. "Your privacy is over." At the Helix Systems Seattle office, a gleaming building in the tech corridor south of downtown, Daniel's arrival caused the usual stir among employees who didn't see the founder often enough. But the difference today was palpable. Word of the flight incident had already spread through the company's internal communications. His chief operating officer, Sarah Chen, met him in the lobby with an enormous smile. "Daniel, you're my hero. Please tell me you've seen the memes." "Memes?" Daniel asked warily. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a flood of images, Patricia's shocked face photoshopped onto various scenes captioned with variations of, "When you realize you've been insulting a billionaire." Daniel dressed as a superhero with the tagline, "The hero we need, humble billionaire." Side-by-side comparisons of how Patricia thinks success looks versus how success actually looks. "This is getting out of hand," Daniel muttered. "Are you kidding? This is incredible PR," Sarah said. "Do you know how hard it is to make a tech CEO likable? You just did it accidentally by being yourself. The phone has been ringing off the hook with interview requests. Forbes wants to do a cover story on the billionaire next door. Every major news outlet wants to talk to you." "No interviews," Daniel said firmly. "Daniel, Sarah, I mean it. This whole thing happened because I don't want to be a public figure. I'm not going to turn Patricia's bad behavior into a media circus." "What about Patricia?" Sarah asked. "Have you seen what's happening to her?" Daniel pulled out his own phone and did a quick search. The results made him wince. Patricia Hammond was being absolutely destroyed on social media. Her company's social media accounts were flooded with comments demanding she be fired. Someone had created a website documenting every public record they could find about her. Her LinkedIn profile had been brigaded with negative reviews. It was a digital mob, and it was merciless. "This is too much," Daniel said quietly. "I wanted her to learn a lesson, not have her life destroyed." "She was pretty cruel to you," Sarah pointed out. "She was," Daniel agreed. "But this," he gestured at his phone, "is disproportionate. Cancel culture, run amok. She made a mistake, a bad one. But does she deserve to have her entire life demolished over it?" Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. "You're a better person than I am. I'd let her burn." "That's not who I want to be," Daniel said. "Besides, destruction doesn't teach anything. It just creates victims who feel persecuted rather than people who genuinely learn and grow." Over the next several days, despite Daniel's refusal to give interviews, the story continued to dominate social media and tech industry news. Patricia Hammond became a symbol of everything wrong with corporate culture, elitism, classism, superficiality. Her pharmaceutical company issued a statement saying they were reviewing the matter internally, corporate speak, for deciding whether to fire her. Daniel watched it all with increasing discomfort. Yes, Patricia had been terrible. Yes, she had deserved to be called out, but the public crucifixion felt wrong. It felt like the mob had lost sight of proportionality. A week after the flight, Daniel made a decision. He called his communications director, a sharp woman named Alex Rodriguez, who had been handling the media storm. "Alex, I want to release a statement," Daniel said. "Finally," Alex said. "What do you want to say?" "I want to say that while Patricia Hammond's behavior was inappropriate and hurtful, I don't support the ongoing harassment she's receiving. I want to acknowledge that we all make mistakes and that public shaming should not be a permanent sentence. I want to encourage people to be better than their worst moments." Alex was quiet for a long moment. "Daniel, are you sure she was awful to you? People are on your side. This statement might turn some of that support against you." "I don't care about being popular," Daniel said. "I care about being right. And this mob justice isn't right." The statement went out that afternoon. As Alex predicted, the response was mixed. Some people praised Daniel for his grace and forgiveness. Others accused him of being weak, of not understanding the systemic issues that Patricia represented, of enabling bad behavior by refusing to let her face full consequences. But something else happened too. Patricia Hammond reached out through his company's general inquiries, asking if she could speak with him directly. Against his team's advice, Daniel agreed. They met at a quiet coffee shop in Seattle, chosen for its lack of significance and low foot traffic. Patricia arrived looking haggard, her expensive clothes still present, but somehow diminished her makeup, unable to hide the exhaustion and stress of the past week. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice trembling, "thank you for agreeing to meet me, and thank you for your statement. It's the only thing that stopped the death threats." "Death threats?" Daniel was shocked. "Hundreds," Patricia said. "People telling me I should kill myself, that the world would be better without me. Someone sent me a noose. My daughter is 9 years old, and she's been crying every day because kids at school have been teasing her about her evil mom." Daniel felt sick. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this." "I know," Patricia said, "and I know I brought most of it on myself. Mr. Reeves, I was horrible to you. Truly, deeply horrible. I have no excuse except that I'm an insecure person who built her entire identity around being better than others. When I couldn't immediately categorize you as beneath me, I panicked and tried to force it." "Why?" Daniel asked simply. Patricia was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. "My father," she said finally, "he was a janitor. We were poor. He worked 3 jobs to send me to college. I was the first person in my family to get a degree. And I was so ashamed of where I came from that I spent my entire adult life running from it, proving I was different, better, worth something." "Your father sounds like he was worth a lot," Daniel said gently. "He was," Patricia whispered. "He died 5 years ago, worked himself literally to death so I could have opportunities he never had. And I repaid him by becoming exactly the kind of person who would have looked down on him, the kind of person who would have judged him by his job and his clothes and decided he didn't matter." She looked up at Daniel, her eyes red and swollen. "When you told me I failed your test, you were right. But it wasn't just your test I failed. It was my father's. I became everything he taught me not to be." Daniel felt unexpected compassion stirring. "Patricia, everyone deserves a chance to become better. What you did was wrong, but it doesn't have to define you." "My company fired me," Patricia said, "not because of what I did to you, but because the media attention was damaging their brand. I'm unemployable now, and no one will hire me. My name is poison." "Is that what you came here for?" Daniel asked carefully. "To ask me to help you get a job?" "No," Patricia said quickly. "I came to apologize. Genuinely, without expecting anything. You didn't have to release that statement defending me. You could have let the mob destroy me completely, but you showed me more compassion than I showed you. I needed to thank you for that, and to tell you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better." And they talked for another hour. Patricia shared more about her background, her insecurities, her realization that the values she had been pursuing were hollow. Daniel listened, occasionally offering his own stories of growing up poor in Montana, of feeling like an imposter even after he became successful. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel made a decision. "Patricia, I'm not going to offer you a job at Helix. I don't think that would be right for either of us. But I'm going to introduce you to some people I know who run programs for executives dealing with personal and professional crises. People who can help you rebuild Not just your career, but your relationship with yourself. Patricia's eyes filled with tears again. Why would you help me after everything I did? Because I believe people can change, Daniel said simply. Because I've made mistakes, 2 different ones maybe, but mistakes nonetheless. Because holding grudges and seeking revenge doesn't make the world better. Growth does. Change does. Second chances do. 6 months later, Daniel received an email from Patricia. She had been working with the programs he had recommended, doing intensive therapy, volunteering at a homeless shelter, and beginning to rebuild her life on a different foundation. She had taken a position with a nonprofit focused on workplace equity, making a fraction of her previous salary, but finding meaning she had never experienced in corporate marketing. I'm not looking for your forgiveness, her email concluded. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I wanted you to know that your kindness changed my life. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you helped me to destroy the person I was and build someone better. Thank you. Daniel read the email twice, then forwarded it to Sarah with a note. This is why we don't feed the mob. Because people are more than their worst moments. The story of the flight eventually faded from social media, replaced by newer outrages and viral moments. But within Helix Systems, it became part of the company culture. New employees were told the story as an example of the values Daniel embodied: humility, compassion, and the belief that how you treat people when you have nothing to gain reveals who you really are. Daniel continued to fly commercial, continued to dress casually, continued to be the same person he had always been. Occasionally, fellow passengers recognized him and wanted to talk about that flight. He was always gracious, but he redirected the conversation away from Patricia's humiliation and toward the broader point that we judge too quickly, that appearances deceive, that kindness costs nothing. On a flight 2 years later, Daniel found himself once again in first class, once again dressed in jeans and a comfortable jacket. The woman next to him was clearly wealthy, clearly accustomed to first-class travel. She glanced at him, opened her mouth as if to make a comment, then stopped herself. I was about to ask if you were in the right seat, she admitted. Then I remembered that flight video. You're him, aren't you? The guy who taught everyone a lesson about judging people, Daniel smiled. I'm him, though I wasn't trying to teach anyone anything. I was just trying to read my book. The woman laughed. Well, you taught me something anyway. I've been trying to be more aware of my own prejudices ever since I saw that video. It's harder than you'd think. It is, Daniel agreed, but it's worth the effort. They talked for the next hour, 2 strangers finding common ground in the recognition that becoming better people was a lifelong project, that everyone had blind spots, that grace and humility mattered. As the plane descended toward its destination, Daniel looked out at the clouds below and thought about Patricia, about second chances, about the strange ways that our worst moments can sometimes become catalysts for growth. He thought about his father, the rancher who had never owned anything expensive, but had been rich in dignity and kindness. His father would have been proud of how he handled the situation, not because he had humiliated someone who deserved it, but because he had chosen compassion over vengeance. The plane landed, passengers gathered their belongings, and Daniel walked through the terminal like any other traveler. Nobody recognized him. Nobody pointed or whispered. He was anonymous again, just the way he liked it. Somewhere across the country, Patricia Hammond was probably having a similar moment of anonymity, rebuilding her life one day at a time, learning to measure success by internal values rather than external markers. And somewhere in the sky, another plane was carrying passengers who would judge each other by superficial standards, who would miss opportunities for connection because they couldn't see past appearances. But maybe Daniel thought as he climbed into his simple car and headed home, maybe a few of them would remember that video. Maybe a few of them would think twice before assuming that the person next to them was beneath them. Maybe the lesson would spread one interaction at a time until judging people by their clothes seemed as outdated as it should be. It was a hopeful thought. Daniel had always believed in hope. It was, after all, what had carried him from poverty in Montana to creating a company that protected the digital infrastructure of the modern world. Hope and the understanding that every person you meet carries invisible stories, invisible struggles, invisible worth. The quiet man in the cheap clothes. The billionaire in disguise. The same person reminding the world that appearances deceive and character reveals. That was the lesson of Flight 1834, and it was a lesson worth remembering.